The sun had barely crested the horizon when Jake Martinez first noticed something was wrong. Something terribly, horribly wrong. What should have been the crystal-clear blue of his backyard swimming pool now looked like a grotesque, muddy disaster. A churning landscape of wet sand and destruction that made his stomach drop. Jake stood motionless on his back patio, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips, trying to comprehend the scene before him. Hundreds of pounds of coarse brown sand had been deliberately dumped into his meticulously maintained pool, creating a nightmare that would cost thousands to fix. The pristine pool liner was now likely shredded, the filtration system probably destroyed, and the pool deck surrounding the water was a muddy mess. His mind raced back to the previous evening's homeowners association meeting. Margaret Sinclair, the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer whom everyone not so secretly called HOA Karen, had been particularly aggressive. Jake had dared to challenge her ridiculous complaint about the height of his front yard landscaping, suggesting that her measurements were incorrect and that his shrubs were well within the community guidelines. The confrontation had been tense. Margaret's face had turned an alarming shade of crimson as Jake calmly presented photographic evidence and precise landscaping measurements. She'd stormed out of the community center's meeting room, muttering something about teaching him a lesson that Jake had initially dismissed as empty threats. But this was beyond anything he could have imagined. The pool was more than just a recreational feature for Jake. It was a sanctuary he worked years to perfect. As a freelance graphic designer who worked from home, the pool area was his stress relief, his personal retreat. He spent countless weekends meticulously maintaining every inch, from the custom tile work to the carefully selected surrounding vegetation. Now, it looked like a construction site gone wrong. Jake's hand trembled as he pulled out his phone, first taking multiple photographs to document the destruction. The evidence needed to be crystal clear. He knew Margaret was vindictive, but this crossed every line of civil behavior. This wasn't just a petty HOA dispute anymore. This was potentially criminal property damage. As the morning light continued to reveal the full extent of the damage, Jake noticed something else. Tire tracks in the soft ground leading to and from the pool area. Someone had brought heavy equipment to dump this massive amount of sand, and they'd been methodical about it. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. This was calculated and precise. His mind was already calculating the potential costs. A complete pool renovation would easily run into 5 figures. The liner would need complete replacement. The filtration system would need to be entirely rebuilt. The deck would require extensive repairs. And all of this because of a ridiculous dispute over some shrubs. Jake took a deep breath. He knew exactly what his next steps would be. This wasn't going to be settled quietly. Margaret Sinclair had no idea what was about to hit her. The local police station's lobby felt sterile and cold, a stark contrast to the burning anger Jake felt coursing through his veins. Detective Sarah Rodriguez listened intently, her experienced eyes scanning the photographs Jake had meticulously printed and brought with him. The evidence was damning: clear tire tracks, precise sand distribution, and the complete destruction of a valuable property asset. Mr. Martinez, Detective Rodriguez began, her tone professional but sympathetic. This goes beyond typical neighborhood dispute. The amount of effort and planning that went into this suggests this wasn't a spontaneous act of vandalism. Jake nodded, his graphic designer's eye for detail working overtime. He had not only documented the damage, but had also created a comprehensive presentation. Satellite images of his property, timestamped photographs, and a detailed cost analysis of the destruction lay spread across the detective's desk. Each document was a testament to the calculated nature of the attack. The HOA meeting recordings were his next piece of evidence. Jake had learned years ago to always record community meetings, a habit that now proved invaluable. The audio captured Margaret Sinclair's increasingly hostile tone, her thinly veiled threats, and Jake's measured, professional responses. "We'll need to interview Mrs. Sinclair," the detective explained. "But I want you to understand that while this looks like clear-cut malicious property damage, we'll need to build a solid case." Jake's mind drifted to the financial implications. As a freelance designer, his home office and pool area were more than just recreational spaces. They were integral to his work-life balance and professional productivity. The pool was where he often took breaks, sketched out design concepts, and found creative inspiration. Now that sanctuary was gone. His phone buzzed. It was his insurance agent, Mark Thompson, whom he contacted earlier that morning. The conversation was not promising. While Jake had comprehensive homeowners insurance, the claim process for such a specific type of vandalism would be complex and time-consuming. The HOA bylaws will complicate things, Mark had warned. They have specific clauses about inter-member disputes and property damage. They might need to involve legal counsel. As if on cue, Jake's attorney, Rebecca Chen, called. A specialist in property and HOA-related litigation, she was already preparing for battle. "This isn't just about the pool," she told Jake. "This is about establishing a precedent. If we let Margaret Sinclair get away with this, she'll continue terrorizing other homeowners. The police station's fluorescent lights seemed to flicker with the weight of the unfolding drama. Jake realized this was no longer just a neighborhood dispute. This was a fight for justice, for respect, and for the basic decency of community living. As he left the police station, Jake knew the next steps would be crucial. Margaret Sinclair had made a grave mistake, and he was determined to ensure she would face the full consequences of her actions. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for precisely 7 p.m., and tension crackled through the community center like an electrical storm. Jake arrived early, a meticulously organized binder tucked under his arm, his graphic designer's precision evident in every carefully prepared document. The room filled slowly, neighbors casting furtive glances, some supportive, others clearly uncomfortable. Margaret Sinclair sat near the front, her posture rigid, but Jake noticed a new vulnerability in her demeanor. The police investigation had clearly gotten under her skin. Her usual combative energy seemed diminished, replaced by a nervous tension that made her fingers tap erratically against her leather portfolio. Board President Robert Kimmel, a retired civil engineer known for his measured approach, called the meeting to order. The agenda was clear: investigate the incident involving Jake Martinez's property and Margaret Sinclair. What had begun as a petty dispute had escalated into a potentially criminal matter that threatened the entire community's reputation. The board has reviewed the evidence, Kimmel began, his voice steady and authoritative. Mr. Martinez has provided extensive documentation of the damage to his property, including police reports, photographic evidence, and expert assessments of the vandalism. Jake's attorney, Rebecca Chen, sat beside him. She had prepared for this moment like a general planning a strategic military campaign. The binder contained not just evidence of the pool's destruction, but a comprehensive timeline of Margaret's previous confrontational behaviors within the community. As the meeting progressed, more details emerged. Neighbors began to share their own experiences with Margaret's increasingly aggressive HOA enforcement. What Jake had initially thought was a personal vendetta now appeared to be a pattern of systematic harassment that had gone unchecked for years. One elderly resident, Helen Barnes, spoke up tremblingly. She tried to fine me for having a bird feeder that was 2 inches higher than the community guidelines, she revealed. When I couldn't afford the fine, she threatened to put a lion on my home. Another homeowner, Mark Rodriguez, shared a similar story about Margaret demanding he repaint his entire house because the shade of beige was 2% off from the approved color palette. The room was transforming from a formal meeting to an impromptu support group for those who had suffered under Margaret's tyrannical HOA leadership. Jake realized he was no longer fighting an individual battle, but had become the catalyst for community-wide change. Rebecca Chen strategically presented the potential legal ramifications for the HOA. The cost of potential lawsuits, the negative publicity, and the clear pattern of harassment could potentially bankrupt the organization if action wasn't taken immediately. Margaret's face grew progressively paler with each revelation. The confident, confrontational woman who had dumped sand in Jake's pool was now shrinking before the collective testimony of her neighbors. Board President Kimmel's final words hung in the air like a verdict. This board will conduct a full investigation. If the allegations are substantiated, immediate action will be taken. As the meeting adjourned, Jake felt a mix of vindication and unease. This was far from over. The real battle was just beginning, and the stakes were higher than a single destroyed swimming pool. The legal machinery began to grind into motion with a precision that would have impressed Jake's designer sensibilities. Within weeks of the HOA meeting, Margaret Sinclair found herself facing multiple legal challenges that threatened to unravel her entire life's carefully constructed facade of community control. Attorney Rebecca Chen had been strategically building a case that was about far more than just a destroyed swimming pool. Subpoena records revealed a pattern of harassment that stretched back years. Margaret's husband, Richard, a once prominent local real estate developer, had been quietly distancing himself from her increasingly erratic behavior. The stress was taking its toll, their marriage was crumbling under the weight of her obsessive HOA enforcement. The turning point came when a forensic accountant discovered something shocking. Margaret had been charging the HOA for administrative fees that were never approved by the board. Small amounts, carefully hidden in obscure line items, had accumulated to nearly $37,000 over 5 years. What had started as a personal vendetta against Jake was now a full-blown investigation into potential financial fraud. Jake's pool reconstruction became a symbol of resistance for the neighborhood. Neighbors began to show up with cold drinks, offering support during the repair process. Local contractors, hearing about the story, offered discounted services. What Margaret had intended as a punishment was transforming into a community-building moment. Detective Rodriguez delivered the next bombshell. Forensic evidence conclusively linked Margaret to the pool vandalism. The tire tracks matched her husband's rarely used work truck, and security camera footage from a nearby convenience store captured her purchasing industrial-grade sand the night before the incident. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Margaret was served with multiple documents, a civil lawsuit from Jake, a criminal complaint for property damage, and an internal HOA investigation into her financial misconduct. Her once impenetrable facade of community authority was crumbling faster than she could have imagined. Richard Sinclair made a decisive move. He filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences that were thinly veiled code for his wife's increasingly unhinged behavior. The local community watched with a mixture of shock and relief as the once feared HOA enforcer was systematically stripped of her power and influence. Jake found an unexpected sense of peace in the midst of the chaos. The pool reconstruction was nearly complete, not just restored, but improved. He designed a new landscape around the pool that was both compliant with HOA guidelines and a personal statement of resilience. Solar-powered lighting, native plants, and a custom-designed outdoor workspace transformed the space from a site of destruction to a testament of personal triumph. As winter approached, the legal proceedings continued, but Jake had already won something far more important than any potential settlement. He had exposed a system of unchecked power, brought a community together, and reclaimed his personal sanctuary. The neighborhood whispered about the HOA Karen case, but Jake remained focused. This was about more than just one destroyed pool. This was about standing up to bullies, challenging unjust systems, and finding strength in community. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker of suppressed tension. Jake sat composed, his tailored navy suit a stark contrast to Margaret Sinclair's disheveled appearance. The once mighty HOA enforcer looked diminished, her carefully coiffed hair now streaked with more gray, her designer blazer hanging loosely on her frame. Judge Elizabeth Ramirez was known for her no-nonsense approach to community disputes. As she reviewed the mountain of evidence, her expression remained impassive, but her eyes betrayed a growing sense of disbelief at the extent of Margaret's misconduct. The trial had become more than just a personal dispute. Local media had picked up the story, dubbing it the Pool Sand Saga, and it had captured the imagination of the entire community. What had begun as a personal vendetta had transformed into a landmark case about abuse of power, harassment, and community governance. Expert witnesses testified about the precise damage to Jake's property. A pool restoration specialist calculated the exact costs, detailing how the sand had not just destroyed the pool's liner, but had compromised the entire filtration system. The forensic accountant laid bare Margaret's financial improprieties, revealing a systematic pattern of overcharging and misappropriation of HOA funds. Richard Sinclair's testimony proved particularly damaging. Once protective of his wife, he now spoke candidly about her increasingly erratic behavior. She became obsessed with controlling every aspect of the neighborhood, he explained, his voice tinged with a mixture of sadness and relief. It wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about power. Jake's attorney, Rebecca Chen, methodically dismantled Margaret's defense. Each piece of evidence was a surgical strike. Security camera footage, financial records, eyewitness testimonies, creating an ironclad case that left little room for doubt. During recess, Jake stepped outside the courtroom. The ordeal had changed him. What had started as a personal nightmare had become a journey of community empowerment. Neighbors who had previously been too afraid to speak out now approached him, sharing their own stories of harassment and thanking him for standing up to Margaret's tyranny. The most unexpected transformation was happening within the HOA itself. The board was implementing comprehensive reforms, term limits, financial oversight, and a new code of conduct that would prevent future abuses of power. Jake had become an unintentional catalyst for systemic change. As the trial entered its final stages, it became clear that the verdict was about more than just Jake's destroyed pool. It was a referendum on community governance, on the abuse of small-scale bureaucratic power, and on the courage it takes to stand up against systematic harassment. Margaret's lawyer made a final desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her reputation, but the evidence was overwhelming. The community watched, collectively holding its breath, as the case that had consumed their neighborhood for months approached its conclusion. Jake remained calm, a graphic designer's precision guiding him through the emotional turbulence. He had documented everything, fought methodically, and refused to be broken. The pool, once a symbol of destruction, now represented something far more powerful: resilience, justice, and the strength of the community united. 2 years after the infamous pool incident, Jake Martinez's life had transformed in ways he could never have anticipated. The legal battle had become a turning point, not just for him, but for the entire community. Margaret Sinclair was no longer a resident of their neighborhood. Following the court's verdict, she had been forced to sell her home, pay significant restitution, and was barred from serving on any HOA board in the county. Her professional and social reputation lay in ruins, a stark consequence of her years of unchecked power and vindictive behavior. Jake's pool had become a neighborhood landmark of sorts. The redesigned space was now a testament to resilience, a beautiful, meticulously maintained outdoor area that hosted community gatherings, charity events, and served as a symbol of positive change. Solar panels he'd installed powered not just his home, but contributed excess energy back to the community grid. The HOA had undergone a complete transformation. New bylaws ensured transparency, with monthly open meetings and a rigorous review process for any complaints. Helen Barnes, the elderly resident who had previously been afraid to speak up, now served on the board, a direct result of the cultural shift Jake had sparked. His graphic design business had unexpectedly flourished in the aftermath. The story of his fight against HOA tyranny had gone viral, attracting clients who were inspired by his principled stand. He'd even been invited to speak at conferences about community advocacy and standing up to bureaucratic bullying. Richard Sinclair, now divorced from Margaret, had become an unlikely ally. He publicly apologized to Jake and had been instrumental in supporting the HOA reforms. His own business had suffered from his ex-wife's reputation, but he was rebuilding, this time the commitment to ethical community involvement. On the 2-year anniversary of the pool incident, the neighborhood threw a block party. Jake stood by his pool, watching children play, neighbors chat, and a community that had once been divided now stand united. Detective Rodriguez, who had been crucial in the initial investigation, was there now a friend rather than just a law enforcement officer. Who would have thought a pile of sand could change everything? Helen Barnes said, approaching Jake with a knowing smile. Jake reflected on the journey. What had begun as a personal attack had become a powerful narrative about standing up to injustice. He'd lost a pool but gained something far more valuable, a sense of community, justice, and personal empowerment. As the sun set on the neighborhood, casting a golden light over the pool that had once been filled with destructive sand, Jake realized that some victories are about more than winning a legal battle. They're about transforming a system, inspiring others, and proving that one person can make a difference. The HOA Karen had been defeated, but the real victory was the community that had risen in her place, stronger, more compassionate, and united.